Hello, this is Dr. Hanaa Assil, and this is paper 2, version 1 of June 2021 in the IGCSE Cambridge Chemistry. Let's take a look at the questions and discuss the answers. So the first question says a gas is released at point P in the apparatus shown. Which gas turns the damp universal indicator paper red most quickly? So I want something that will turn it red and will turn it most quickly. So which of these will turn the indicator paper red? You should realize that ammonia is a base. It will turn it to blue, not to red. So that's not what we want. Chlorine will bleach universal indicator paper. That means it will turn it white, not red. So I have either HCl or SO2 because these are acidic gases. Now, which one will turn it most quickly? Remember, we're talking here about the process of diffusion, and the process of diffusion happens faster if the particles have lower molecular mass. So what is the molecular mass of HCl? It's 36.5. Molecular mass of SO2 is 64. So which one will diffuse faster? It is the HCl that has lower molecular mass. The second question says a mixture is separated using the apparatus shown. What is the mixture? Of course, this is filtration, so we need a mixture of two things. One is not soluble and the other is soluble. So if he says aqueous copper sulfate and aqueous sodium chloride, remember the word aqueous means dissolved in water. So these are two solutions. You cannot separate them by filtration. The next one is aqueous copper sulfate and copper metal. That means you have a metal that's not soluble in a solution. Yes, you can separate it by filtration. If you look at the other options, you have copper and sulfur. Both of them are solids. Ethanol and ethanoic acid, both of them are liquids, so you cannot use filtration to separate them. Which statement about paper chromatography is correct? I'm going to remind you. This is the process of paper chromatography in which we try to determine how many colors in a dye, for example, or how many substances in a food color. So which choice is correct? A solvent is needed to dissolve the paper. No, we need a solvent, but that's not to dissolve the paper. It is to go up and separate the spots based on difference in solubilities in the solvent. We're not trying to dissolve the paper. Paper chromatography separates mixtures of solvents. No, it doesn't separate mixtures of solvents. It separates mixtures of dyes or colors. The solvent should cover the baseline. No, we said the solvent should be below the baseline. The baseline should be drawn in pencil. Yes, that is correct. The baseline should be drawn in pencil, and this is because pencil or graphite will not dissolve in the solvent, so it will not interfere in the experiment. Element X has 7 protons. Element Y has 8 more protons than X. Which statement about element Y is correct? Well, we need to look at the periodic table. Which one has 7 protons? 7 protons means the small number is 7 or the atomic number is 7. And he's saying element Y has 8 more protons. 8 plus 7, that's 15. So Y has 15 protons, so Y is the one that has atomic number 15. Then we look at the choices. He's saying Y has more electron shells than X. Well, you can see that nitrogen is in a period, phosphorus is in the other period. So they will have different number of shells. Now, let's look at the other choices. He's saying Y, which is P for phosphorus, has more electrons in its outer shell. No, actually, they're both in the same group, so they would have the same number of electrons in outer shell. Y is in a different group. No, it's in the same group. Y is in the same period. No, it's in the different periods. Okay, a covalent molecule Q contains only 6 shared electrons. What is Q? Well, let's think about this. 6 shared electrons means it has how many covalent bonds? Remember, each covalent bond has a pair of shared electrons, 2 shared electrons in each bond. So if I'm saying it has a total of 6 shared electrons, that means it has a total of 3 covalent bonds. So which of these has 3 covalent bonds? Well, if you draw ammonia, this is how we draw ammonia. It will have 3 covalent bonds, so this should be my answer. Let's look at the others. ClCl has only 1 bond. Methane has 4 bonds. Water has 2 bonds. So the one that has 3 covalent bonds, and that means 6 shared electrons, is ammonia. The arrangement of particles in each of 2 solids are shown. What are S and T? You should recognize these diagrams. You should realize that S is diamond. That's how we draw diamond. Now, what is T? He's saying I have a choice between silicon dioxide and sodium chloride. You should remember that silicon dioxide will have the same structure as diamond, but the difference is diamond, all the atoms are carbon. In silicon dioxide, it is made up of silicon atoms and oxygen atoms. So that diagram in T is not silicon dioxide, it is sodium chloride. That is how we draw an ionic compound. We said it is made up of ionic crystal lattice with alternating positive and negative ions. So that is the structure in T. Then he says, which statement about metals is correct? Well, let's review. What are metals? We said metals are layers of positive ions surrounded by delocalized free moving electrons. So let's take a look at the choices. He's saying metals conduct electricity when molten because negative ions are free to move? No. Metals conduct electricity because negative electrons are free to move. We don't have negative ions in metals. Then he says metals conduct electricity when solid because the positive ions are free to move? No. First of all, the positive ions are not free to move, and metals conduct electricity because it is the electrons, the delocalized electrons, that are free to move. Metals are malleable because the bonds between the atoms are weak? No. Metals are malleable because the layers of ions can slide over each other. That is the one that is correct. 2 elements P and Q are in the same period of the periodic table. P and Q react together to form an ionic compound. That means that one of them is a metal and the other is a non-metal. And he wrote that P has 1 positive and Q has 1 negative. And that means that if I look at the periodic table, P must be the one in group 1, Q is in group 7. So that when it forms ions, then the P will have 1 positive and the Q will have 1 negative. So he's saying which statement is correct. And the first choice is an ion of P has more electrons than an ion of Q. Remember, P, let's say we're talking about sodium, so that's 11, that is 281. When it forms an ion, it is 28. Now, the chlorine was originally 27, and it gains an electron, it becomes 28 also. So actually the ions, both ions will have the same number of electrons. Element P is non-metallic? No, we said element P is in group 1, that's a metal, and that's why it loses electrons and becomes positive. P is to the left of Q? Yes, P would be to the left of Q. The formula of the compound is P4Q4? No, we don't write that. When we have P4Q4, then we simplify it, we divide through by 4. So actually, the formula of this one would be PQ. For example, the formula of sodium chloride will be NaCl, not Na4Cl4. Okay. Then the next question says 2.56 grams of a metal oxide MO2 is reduced to 1.92 grams of the metal. what is the relative atomic mass of M? So we're trying to determine what is the MR of M. You should realize, first of all, that if I start with MO2, he's saying it is reduced, so it forms M plus O2. He started with 2.56 grams total of reactants. We should have the same total in products. We have something called conservation of mass. So the masses we start with, total at the beginning, we should end up with total masses the same. So if he says I have 1.92 grams of M, then the rest of the 2.56 is the oxygen. So now I have the mass of oxygen. Then I can get the number of moles of oxygen. And if I have the number of moles of oxygen, they're obviously the same as the number of moles of M. So now I have the number of moles of M, I can get the MR. MR is mass over number of moles. So that would, I have 1.92 grams of the metal. I divide by the number of moles, and this tells me that the MR is 96. Did you notice this? Okay. Then, in separate experiments, electricity was passed through concentrated aqueous sodium chloride and molten lead bromide. What would happen in both experiments? Let's review this. What happens when we do electrolysis of concentrated sodium chloride? We said the hydrogen is formed at the cathode and the chlorine is formed at the anode, and I end up with sodium hydroxide in solution. If I do electrolysis of lead to bromide, we said we get lead at the cathode and bromine at the anode. So when he says a halogen would be formed in both experiments at the anode, yes, I either get chlorine or bromine. So that is correct. Now, what about the other choices? He said a metal would be formed at the cathode in both experiments. Remember that when we do concentrated solution of sodium chloride, you don't get the metal. It is the hydrogen that is formed. Hydrogen would be formed at the anode. Remember, he's saying in both experiments. First of all, hydrogen would be formed at the cathode, and it is in only one of them. So the only correct answer is A. Please check that all the other answers are wrong when you choose a specific answer. What is the ionic half equation for the reaction that occurs at the cathode when molten lead bromide is electrolyzed? Again, when we do electrolysis of molten lead to bromide, what happens at the cathode? We said the lead 2+ takes up electrons and becomes lead metal. The complete combustion of propane is exothermic, so we're looking for a reaction that is exothermic, and we are starting with C3H8 plus 5O2 to give 3CO2 plus 4H2O. So which energy level diagram represents this? First of all, when we say that a reaction is exothermic, will the products be above or below the reactants? You should remember, exo means the reactants give out heat, and that means the products will have less heat or less energy than the reactants. So my answer is C or D. Then the reactants are C3H8 plus 5O2, not 3CO2 plus 4H2O. You need to start with the reactants and end with the products. So the correct answer is D. Which equation represents a reaction that takes place in a fuel cell? Let's review what's a fuel cell. A fuel cell is a cell that we use to produce energy. And if he says what is a fuel cell, it is actually a cell in which the reactants are being continuously supplied. So in the hydrogen fuel cell, for example, we put in hydrogen and oxygen. We are continuously putting in hydrogen and oxygen. And what happens is they react to give water. When they react, electrons are lost and gained, and this flow of electrons causes energy to be produced or electricity to be produced. So remember that a fuel cell, if we say what's a fuel cell, it's a cell in which The reactants are being continuously supplied. Now, the example that we have is the hydrogen fuel cell. Now, what happens in the hydrogen fuel cell is that hydrogen reacts with oxygen to give what? Okay, when sulfur is heated, it undergoes what kind of change as it melts? We said melting or boiling or freezing or evaporation. Change of state is a physical change because we're not forming any new substance. Then he says further heating causes the sulfur to undergo a what kind of change to form sulfur dioxide? In this case, the sulfur is reacting to form something new, so that is a chemical change. 4 statements about the effect of increasing temperature on a reaction are shown. Which statements are correct? So we're increasing temperature. Will that cause the activation energy to become lower? Remember, activation energy becomes lower only if I put in a catalyst. Otherwise, nothing of the other factors affects the activation energy. Now, when we increase the temperature, the particles move faster? Yes. There are more collisions between the particles per second? Yes. There are more collisions which have energy greater than the activation energy? Yes, because now we have more molecules with energy greater than the activation energy. So my answer is 2, 3, and 4, so that is C. An example of a redox reaction is shown. Which statement about the reaction is correct? First of all, zinc. Is zinc here oxidizing or reducing agent? Remember that the zinc has changed to zinc 2+. That means the zinc has lost electrons. And that means the zinc has become oxidized, so it is a reducing agent. Remember, zinc lost electrons, became zinc 2+. The zinc was oxidized. The thing that was oxidized is the reducing agent because it will reduce the other one. So the zinc is a reducing agent and it reduces the other reactant. Which statement about a reaction in equilibrium is correct? Let's review again. If I have a reaction in equilibrium like the Haber process, nitrogen plus hydrogen to give ammonia. Again, what do we mean by equilibrium? We said equilibrium means the rate of forward reaction equals rate of backward reaction, and concentrations of reactants and products remain constant. So which of these statements is correct? He's saying both the forward and the backward reactions are proceeding at the same rate? Yes, that is correct. Let's take a look at the others. He's saying neither the forward nor the backward is proceeding. No, the reaction doesn't stop. The forward continues and the backward continues, but at equilibrium, they're going at the same rate. The amount of product present is no longer affected by changes in temperature or pressure. No, it will, because changes in temperature and pressure will determine whether the reaction goes forward to give more product or backward to give less product. The amount of product present is only affected by change in pressure. No, there are other factors like concentration, like temperature, like adding reactants and things like that. Element X forms an oxide XO that neutralizes sulfuric acid. Which row describes X and XO? So first of all, he's saying XO is an oxide that neutralizes acid, so it has to be a base. And in order to be a base, it has to be an oxide of a metal. Copper sulfate is prepared by adding excess copper oxide to warm dilute sulfuric acid. Which purification methods are used to obtain the solid copper sulfate? So once we add the copper oxide to the sulfuric acid, we said this method is called neutralization method. What is the next thing that I need to do? I have excess copper oxide, which I don't want, so I need to filter it to remove the excess solid as residue. Then I need to take the solution, the filtrate, and we do crystallization. So what I need here is 1 and 2. Some reactions of element M are shown. What is element M? Well, let's take a look. He said he burned M in air and he got the oxide. Good. This oxide of M, when he added it to water, the litmus became red. And that means it is acidic oxide. And this oxide, when I added potassium permanganate, it went colorless. What is potassium permanganate used to test for? It is used to test for sulfur dioxide. So that means that my element was sulfur. In which equation is the underlined reactant acting as a base? What do we mean by base? Base is a proton acceptor. So I want the underlined reactant to take H plus to give the product. So which one took H plus and became the product? Of course, the H2O took an H plus and became H3O plus. So it is acting as a base. Why is helium used to fill balloons? Well, we use it to fill balloons not because it's monatomic and not because it's just something in group 8 and not even because it has a full outer shell, but we do use it to fill balloons because it is less dense than air, so the balloon will go up. Okay, which elements in the table are transition elements? Okay, let's review the characteristics of transition elements. We said a transition element will have more than one oxidation state or more than one valency, and it will form colored compounds, and it will be used as catalyst. So which of these can be transition? E, of course, he says it has only one oxidation state. That's not right. So F has two oxidation states. He says it can be F plus or F2 plus. That means this is a transition metal. Now G forms white salts, so it doesn't form colored compounds, so it cannot be transition. But H is used as a catalyst, so H can be transition. So it is F and H. Then he says element R forms a covalent compound R2Si with silicon. Which row describes R? First of all, if he says it forms a covalent compound, is it a metal or a non-metal? Remember, metals cannot form covalent. They form only ionic. So it has to be non-metal. So my answer is C or D. Now, is it group 2 or group 6? Well, you should realize anything in group 2 is a metal. It cannot be a non-metal. So the answer must be D. Now he's saying it is R2Si. Where did he get R2Si from? Remember that silicon is in group 4, so its valency is 4. So you should have R4. Now, if R is in group 6, that means valency 2. Well, if I have 4 and 2, I can simplify them. So that is why it is R2Si. So my answer is D. Some properties of metal J are listed. What is J? So he's saying, okay, J does not react with cold water. J reacts with acid. No reaction occurs when the oxide of J is heated with carbon. How do I decide what is J? Well, we look at the electrochemical series. He says J does not react with cold water. Which of these reacts with cold water? Potassium, sodium, calcium react with cold water. So if he says it doesn't, so that's not J. Then he says J reacts with acid. Now, reacts with acid means it cannot be anything below hydrogen. Then he says no reaction occurs when the oxide is heated with carbon. If no reaction occurs when the oxide is heated with carbon, that means it has to be above carbon, not below it. So that leaves us with either magnesium or aluminium, so choice C is the correct one. Some metal nitrates and carbonates decompose when heated strongly. And he's saying metal Q has a nitrate that decomposes to give a salt and colorless gas only. Now let us take a look at this. What did we say about nitrates? We said group 1 behaves differently from any other group. If I have anything in group 1 the nitrate gives a salt, sodium nitrite, for example, plus a colorless gas, which is oxygen. But if it is nitrate of any other group, it would give the oxide plus nitrogen dioxide gas, which is a reddish brown gas, plus oxygen, which is a colorless gas. So obviously Q is something in group 1, not any other group. Then he says the carbonate does not decompose. Well, you should realize that means it is in group 1 because carbonates of group 1 do not decompose on heating. Carbonates of any other group would decompose. So obviously it is sodium. Which substances are used in the extraction of aluminium? Remember, what did we say about extraction of aluminium? First of all, what is the ore? Is the ore bauxite or zinc blende? You should remember that the ore of aluminium is bauxite. So my answer is A or B. Then we do bauxite, electrolysis of bauxite and what? Remember we said we add cryolite to lower the melting point of the mixture. So that is my answer. In this question, he says different types of steel alloys are manufactured by changing the percentage of carbon in the alloy. I will remind you that we said different forms of steel are iron plus certain percentage of carbon. And remember, the more the carbon, the stronger the alloy. And he gives you information in the list, and he says what are the properties of a steel alloy that contains 0.23% of carbon. This is very easy. Which of these has about 0.23%? If you look at this, he's saying alloy mixture 2 has between 0.21 and 0.3%, so that is the one we're looking at, and that means its strength should be high and its hardness should be medium. Ammonia is made by reacting nitrogen and hydrogen in the Haber process. Which changes in reaction conditions would give a greater yield of ammonia? So which of these gives more ammonia? If I add more catalyst, remember, adding more catalyst does not affect the yield because it speeds up both forward and backward reactions. So it doesn't affect the amount of ammonia that is obtained. Increasing the pressure, well, yes. If I increase the pressure, we said the reaction goes to the side that has less number of molecules. So in this case, it is the forward reaction, so it will give more yield of ammonia. Increasing the particle size of the catalyst, again, we said anything regarding the catalyst has nothing to do with how much ammonia I get. So my answer is only 2. Which process removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? You should remember that the only process that removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is photosynthesis. All the other options here give carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Which catalyst is used in the contact process? Again, what is the contact process? Remember, the contact process is when we burn sulfur dioxide in air to give sulfur trioxide. This is one of the steps to make sulfuric acid. What is the catalyst? You should realize the catalyst is vanadium oxide, and you should know the other conditions: pressure 2 atm, temperature 450 degrees Celsius. A white solid Z reacts with acid to produce a gas, and the same gas is produced when Z is heated strongly. So what is Z? Again, something that reacts with acid to give a gas, and that same gas is produced. If I heat it, then I'm starting with a carbonate like calcium carbonate. So that's the only carbonate in my choices, because carbonate plus acid will give carbon dioxide gas, and heating the carbonate alone would also give the same gas. What is the structure of butanoic acid? Again, but means 4 carbons. Oic acid means it has that C double bond O single bond OH, which we write as CO2H. So it must have CO2H, so it's not D. It must have 4 carbons, so my answer is B. Compound Z contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Molecules of Z have 4 hydrogen atoms, 2 carbon atoms. So it is F something. Compound Z can be made by oxidation of an alcohol. First of all, oxidation of an alcohol gives an acid. So the answer must be ethanoic acid. And if you look at the others, yes, it has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it has 4 hydrogens and 2 carbon atoms. Which statement about homologous series and isomerism is correct? So let's see. What are isomers? We said isomers are the ones that have the same molecular formula but different structure. So butane and butene, are they isomers? You should realize no, they're not isomers. Alkane cannot be isomer of alkene because they have different general formulas. They would have different molecular formulas and so on. Compounds in the same homologous series have the same general formula? Yes, that is definition of homologous series. The others, of course, are wrong. Which statement about alkanes is correct? Okay, let's take a look at alkanes. Alkanes, methane, ethane, propane, butane, pentane, and so on. They burn in oxygen? Yes, actually they burn in oxygen to give carbon dioxide and water. If you look at the other choices, they contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. No, you should remember that alkanes are hydrocarbons. That means they have carbon and hydrogen only. They contain double bonds? No, alkenes are the ones that contain double bonds. They contain ionic bonds. Remember, no, alkanes are covalent compounds. What is an advantage of manufacturing ethanol by fermentation? Remember, that's one of the methods of making ethanol is by fermentation of glucose. And he's saying which of these is an advantage? The process is very fast? No, actually, when we talk about fermentation, we said one of the disadvantages is that it is slow. It's not fast. Ethanol requires no separation? No. We said when we do fermentation, we end up with a mixture of ethanol and water and yeast. So the product needs to be purified. The raw materials used are renewable? Yes, the raw material used is renewable because we make it from sugar cane. There are no other products formed? No, you should realize that when we prepare ethanol by fermentation, we get ethanol plus carbon dioxide. P, Q, R, and S are 4 organic compounds. It's saying P is unsaturated hydrocarbon, Q burns but is unreactive, R contains single and double bonds, S undergoes addition polymerization. Which of these are alkenes? Okay, unsaturated hydrocarbon, remember that all alkenes have a double bond, so we say they are unsaturated. Q burns but otherwise is unreactive? No, we said alkanes are the ones that are unreactive. Alkenes will do a lot of addition reactions. Now, R contains a single bond and a double bond. Yes, you can have mixtures of single and double, so you can have at least one double bond. S undergoes addition polymerization. Yes, you should remember that alkenes are the ones that do addition polymerization. So I want P, R, and S. The structure of a synthetic polymer is shown. The structure shows that it is a what? Polyamide or polyester? Remember, the one that has nitrogen is polyamide. So this is A or B. Then this is formed by which kind of polymerization? You have to remember polyamides and polyesters are made by condensation polymerization. Which substance is a natural polymer? I'm going to remind you again, natural polymers are things like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. These are referred to as natural polymers. The synthetic polymers are the nylon and terylene. So he's saying which one is natural. The one natural in here is protein. And that's the end of the exam. I hope this was useful. Thank you for listening.